Alright, in this video, we're going to get into the last year. This last year, 2023, you may have noticed we've been releasing albums quite steadily every couple of months. And this last year we released 5 albums. And I just want to get into some thoughts around that release schedule, some of the process, how long it took to write those albums, why did I release them so quickly every couple of months, what have I learned from releasing so frequently and recording and writing so quickly, what I've learned from releasing so quickly and writing so frequently, and if I've gotten better at writing music. So some thoughts. I will be honest, I quite enjoyed releasing quite frequently. I think recording, writing, mixing, mastering, doing all that in a quick turnaround. I think when we started the process of doing this, initially it wasn't even a thing I was even considering, but in the beginning of 2023 we released Ground Zero, and Ground Zero took about a year to write because I was only working on it one day per week. Usually every Saturday I would sit down and work on it, so that's why it took so long. But as I finished it, I basically had nothing to do, so I was like, with some encouragement from my lady, I was like, okay, well, I've got all this time now and I'm gonna release this next year, sometime in January, I think. Release Ground Zero next year sometime in January. And I was like, I have all this time, and it's like I don't want to be sitting around doing nothing, so why not write the next thing after that? And that would become Fuck Your Pop. And then of course after I finished that, I was like, okay, and now I have a second album to release here, and it's only been I think Fuck Your Pop took 2.5 months to write. I could be mistaken on that, but I think it was around 2.5 months. And then of course after that I was like, well, I might as well just move on to the next thing, and that would be The New Dawn. And then of course The New Dawn took me a month and a half to write. And then after The New Dawn, Architects of the Future, and that took a month and a half to write. And then of course after Architects of the Future it was Ant 2, The Forever War. And I think it didn't take me very long to write these albums. And originally what I was thinking was, I'll just have everything in the tank and then I'll release like 2 albums per year and just save the albums for the following year. But things were starting to pile up, and it was like, okay, well, I've got all these albums now, and it's like, granted, I don't typically write with subject matter that's a little dated. My thinking was that, well, now I've got all this material, I've got all these albums in the tank, and I don't want it to become not relevant anymore. And so I was like, okay, fuck, like I need to release these in a quicker fashion. So I was like, well, maybe. And granted, the 2 per year thing for me, that was like, oh, well, some of my idols did that back in the day, like Skinny Puppy. They did that. They released 2 albums a year for a few years, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or a couple of years at least. And that was my thinking. And then of course I had all this stuff that was sitting in the tank, and it was piling up, and I was like, well, maybe I need to do it more frequently. And then I was unsure about that, and then of course I chatted with my lady, and I was like, okay, well, maybe every couple of months then. And then of course I was still building a catalog of material during 2022, and then of course this last year into 2023 I was still building more stuff, and it basically, I was like, okay, every couple of months, and we'll see how that goes. And then of course during 2023 I've written a bunch of other stuff, and it's gonna be really, as you may have noticed, we had a YouTube video we just did a YouTube video just getting into what this next year, 2024, is going to look like for Twitch. And as you may have, if you've watched that, you would know that we're going to try and release an album per month. As long as we can keep up the pace. I mean, if we run out of material, that's fine. It's not a huge deal, but I would like to keep up the pace. I would like to keep the pace steady and releasing once per month for as long as I can fucking do it. While I had all this stuff in the tank, I was like, this last year, I was like, fuck, like, I was just looking into other artists, like their catalogs and stuff, and there were some artists that really inspired me, like David Bowie. I think Bowie there was a year that he released 2 or 3 albums, or maybe 5. I can't quite remember, but he was quite prolific. And then of course I looked into like Frank Zappa, and Frank Zappa, I think in his lifetime he released 60 albums, and I think for a couple of those years he released 5 albums per year. So I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna fucking do this. And that was kind of my thinking around it. I do have goals that I want to reach in my lifetime of how many albums I want to release and stuff like that. So I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm definitely in line with those goals. And I think there's two goals. There's one that if I reach, it'll be fucking awesome and amazing, and that's all I ever wanted. And the second one is kind of like that stretch goal where it's like, okay, if I reach the first goal and then I can reach the second one, maybe I'll just keep going and going and going, and that's until of course I die or whatever. But that's kind of what my thinking is. And the reason why I released them so quickly was because I was worried about relevancy. And granted, after writing so many at a point in time, I was like, okay, I need to be a little bit more not as I need to think about the future and what I'm thinking about future-wise, and what I can see trends that could possibly happen as far as like technology or political trends or whatever it is. And so I started thinking about the future, which is kind of, well, to be honest with you, was kind of how granted I wanted to write an album called Architects of the Future, but it just so happened that I was thinking about the future at that point in time. So I was like, and that's kind of how things evolved after that, was like Architects of the Future was kind of the album that I was thinking about the future and thinking about technology, future of technology, thinking about the future of politics, thinking about future things and future of like architecture, all of that kind of stuff. And then it kind of after that, that was kind of like what set the kind of how I've been looking at the albums that I've worked on after that are going to be coming out this year. Granted, maybe I do have some predictions as far as future things goes, and maybe I'm wrong in some of those, and that's fine, it doesn't matter. So what have I learned about releasing so often? Well, more of my material is out there. I mean, I look at it as like, I know I can write quickly. What actually set that. Granted, I wasn't intending on doing it in the beginning when I was writing Ground Zero, but before Ground Zero, a couple albums before that, there was an album that we wrote called Darkness Rise. And that album, I decided to challenge myself and see if I could write an album in a month's time. And of course, I did that. I actually beat that challenge by 2 weeks, I think. I think I wrote an album in 2.5 weeks, that album in 2.5 weeks. And of course, after that, I took a little bit more time with Chaos Create. I was like, you know, writing so quickly like that in a very short time span, it forces you to make executive decisions and decide on things a lot quicker. But it also, if you're doing a challenge like that, it also helps you grow and makes you realize that, you know, like, you don't need to overstuff your songs. You don't need to. Granted, if you want to be a little bit more detailed in your sound design or whatever, there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with taking more time. But I realized that I can write very quickly, and granted, like I said, you don't necessarily want to do that in that fashion, because I found after the fact, like when I was writing Chaos Create, it was actually I started off as like, okay, I'm going to do this in like a month or 2.5 weeks and try and get it out as quickly as possible and continue that whole mentality. But I realized during the process of that album that it was actually causing a lot of stress for me to write so quickly, and I needed to slow down a little bit. So I took more time with Chaos Create, and then of course Ground Zero that came after Chaos Create, I took way more time. Chaos Create took, I think, 1.5 months, I think, or maybe it took 3 months. I can't remember. 3 months or 1.5 months. I can't quite remember because it's so long ago now. But Ground Zero took a year to write, and I wanted to take more time with Ground Zero and just, get it to where I want it to be. And then, of course, without repeating myself in this video, as Ground Zero, after Ground Zero, I just started to pick up the pace, because I was like, well, now I have all this time because I've written the album for next year, which was Ground Zero for 2023, and now I don't want to do nothing, so I just continued that creative process. Now I know I can write in quick order. Granted, I may not want to take 2.5 weeks to spit something out, but I know I can write that quickly now, and I know that an album nowadays for me doesn't take that long. And I like the idea of releasing more frequently. I like the idea of being able to take ideas and maybe not concepts, or maybe concepts or themes, and turning them into fully fledged songs in quick order, relatively quick order. I'm not caught up on process. Like, the process is important, but I'm not caught up on it. Like, for me, it's like, granted, my process is going to change a little bit in the next little while here. By the time you see this video, I'm probably going to be in the midst of writing something else. But my studio is very utilitarian. Like, it's very like I have it set up so that I can go from one thing to the next, and just it's very efficient, I guess, and it makes sense for my process. And I don't have a lot of gear. I don't deliberate over things too much. Like, I don't get caught up in the process. The process is not what's important. It's actually just getting the work done and getting it done. And I find artists, I'm not going to name people here, but I find certain artists, they get caught up in mythologizing the process, and it doesn't need to be. It's like, granted, it's nice to have like your studio set up in a certain fashion. You have candles lit and all that stuff to you create a mood when you're writing and recording. But for me, at least this in 2023 and from a little bit from 2022, was that and this is something that's kind of always followed me, actually, is that ever since my early days in my first band, Adam Hates You, when I was writing I was not in an ideal situation. I was not in an ideal environment. And granted, over the years, I've sort of created this environment that I can work in here that is comfortable, and it's good for, sussing out ideas and, being creative and stuff like that. But the one thing I've learned over the last year and a bit is that I think, like, it's just about getting the work done, and as I stated earlier, I think people get too caught up in the process, or the room needs to be done in a certain, arranged in a certain fashion. And you know, some of this stuff that I wrote, that I released this last year or in 2023, some of the stuff I wrote, some of it I actually wrote while I was traveling. Some of it I wrote while I was in a coffee shop. It's just about getting the work done. Like I can work in literally any environment, and writing lyrics is a little different for me. I can't really write them outside of a studio. The lyric process for me is very personal, so I don't like going into a coffee shop and sitting down and writing lyrics. I don't like doing that. So that would be, and it's not so much about the process for lyrics with me. It's just that I don't like. It feels uncomfortable to be in public spaces and I'm trying to express myself lyrically. And generally, when I write lyrics, I'm kind of singing along as I write them, and that's why for lyrics it's better for me to be in a studio rather than write them outside of the studio. However, that doesn't mean I haven't written them outside of studios before. I have. It's just I feel like I can suss out what I'm trying to get at what I'm trying to communicate in the lyrics, generally by myself and somewhat isolated, I think. But as far as the music goes, the music, and maybe I need to try writing lyrics a little bit more outside of my studio environment and just see how I'm feeling and all of that kind of stuff during that writing process. Maybe that's something I need to try, maybe that's something I need to try just to see what comes out. But as far as like the music goes, I can be in any environment, literally any environment. And granted, probably not in a jungle unless I was set up. When I say in any environment, I just mean like, you know, I can be working on a jet, or I can be working on a bus, or I can be working on I can work in a coffee shop. I can work in I can work in like commons areas in universities. I haven't tried doing it outside in a park or something like that. Like, I've not done that. Not sure I want to try that because I don't like the idea of bringing my laptop and exposing the elements. Yes, I can basically work in every environment. And from this whole process of writing these albums so quickly, is that I've learned is that it's just about getting the work done. I don't mythologize the process. Granted, sometimes I have my studio set up and have lights turned on and stuff like I do in this video. As you can see, there's purple lights there and all of that mood lighting. But I don't need to make my environment special or anything like that. It is nice. It is not necessary. I think also something that I've learned from this whole release process, and some of what my thinking is that I think more music is better. Granted, you want to keep your quality up, but I think ultimately, if more of your material is out there, there's more ways for it to be exposed to other people, to potential followers. Have I gotten better at music writing? I would say so. I would say my mixing and mastering has gotten better. This next thing that I intend on working on, I am changing things a little bit. I'm changing the studio a little bit. Not so that it's a special environment, but I'm changing the way I work on music and the way I work on specific pieces of gear. I want it to be a little bit more rotated, like I want to rotate things in and out, and so I can just focus in on one thing, one piece of gear, and not have to think about like, okay, how do I connect this to that, and how do I run these things at the same time, and I want to write this on this thing and this on that, and I feel like I need focused attention on certain pieces of gear so that I can, one of the reasons is so I can learn how to use it in the fashion that I'm hoping to use it. Do I have any advice? Do I have any advice for folks out there wanting to write and record an album? I think in the beginning for me, when I was first starting to get into doing industrial music in my first band, it was more just messing around and figuring out what I liked, and just kind of working with the software I was using at the time, and just playing around and just playing with things and just seeing what I liked. But as time has progressed, it's becoming more and more focused, and I'm focusing in on more of the things that I want in my music, and I would say I'm definitely getting better at the things I want to get better at, because I'm practicing those things, I'm doing more of those things. And I would say if you're looking to write in quick order, if you're looking to spit something out really quickly, you just need to do more and more and more of it. And I sometimes, like, to me it doesn't make sense to spit out a lot of material when you're first starting up, because maybe you need to find a direction, maybe you need to find your voice a little bit. But as you carry on, and if you're dedicated, the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the faster you can get your ideas out. And granted, as I stated earlier, my studio is going to change a little bit. If your studio is set up right, things can be more efficient, they can work. You can set it up so that it's more catered to your workflow. However, I would not get caught up on that. That whole, everything needs to be in its perfect place, the proper lights need to be whatever. You don't need to, there's no need for, you will eventually get to your ideal studio setup. You'll eventually get to record in your ideal studio setup. And you know, that's a funny thing is, even though my studio is set up the way I want it to be, these days I just don't want to be in it. I feel like it's becoming too much of the same, which is why this next thing that I intend on working on is going to be a little bit different and a little bit more focused on specific pieces rather than having everything out and you know, going, do I want to put my synth in this? Do I want to put this in that? And having all these choices, I'm getting in and focusing on certain pieces. Yeah, there's no reason to get stuck in not having an ideal environment. There's things, however, I will say, even though you may not be in an ideal environment, you can always set up your environment so that, or change it so that it is a little bit better for your inspiration and your creativity. Because you don't necessarily have to keep your studio or whatever wherever you're working. You don't necessarily have to keep it the same. You can always rearrange things. You can always move things around. You can always change things. You can always, like, if you want to make your studio so that it's a little bit more tighter and it feels more tense, why the fuck not? Why the fuck wouldn't you do that? Like, if you want that kind of vibe or that energy, or if you want that kind of environment, then you can always change your environment to be like that. Even if you change your environment and it's just not, it doesn't feel right, it's not about making it perfect. It's about just getting the work done. And truthfully, it doesn't matter where you do it, as long as you can be creative in whatever environment you're in when you're writing music. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about this whole releasing 5 albums this last year. There's nothing I would do different, as I stated in the last video that last or the second last video that we did. This year we're picking up the pace. We're going to try and release once a month, and we'll see how far I get with that. I may run out of material because I may not be able to write as quickly as I'd like to, but we'll see. I've still got several albums in the tank right now, and it's I'll be releasing something. Well, I released Ant 2, The Forever War, at the end of December, so just as a sneak peek, it's likely, being that I'm releasing once a month now, that you're going to see something at the end of January. I'm not going to say what it is. Maybe I'll change my mind, but yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. That is the process. That is my thoughts on releasing 5 albums this last year. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you feel it has value, please share it with your buds. Maybe you want to encourage your bandmates or the musician, industrial musician in your life to get to writing and put something out. Maybe it's that first album, maybe it's their sophomore album, maybe it's a couple after that. Either way, we hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions or comments regarding this process, leave them in the comment section. If you like what's on this channel, please hit that subscribe button to be notified when the next video comes out. So see you in the next video.